Let's turn to the federal election. We're about 10, 11 days away from voting. Now, Labor won't release its costings until next week. It has already had its campaign launch. Anthony Albanese backing a 5.1% increase to the minimum wage. And business alarmed that anything certainly higher than that would be to the detriment of the Australian economy. How is this likely to affect voters, particularly given we haven't had the Liberal National Party campaign launch yet? Well, joining us to discuss and some predictions about the election from Maven Data is Elisa Choy. Elisa, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right, so it's a difficult subject. A lot of pollsters have been burnt in the past trying to make predictions about election results. Just talk us through then what metrics you're using, because particularly the last election, so many people got it wrong.
Yes, the key about election polling and the flaws of that is that when you're asking for people's opinions, sometimes they just don't want to tell you the truth for whatever reason. And so the difference in our method is that because we're actually using a different data set, it's the internet. So we're analysing using AI all publicly available information that sits outside of firewall. So websites, blogs, and social media is what we analyse. We're also measuring emotions in the content that people are engaging with in the privacy of their own screen. And it's the emotions that drive people's behaviour.
All right, well, let's get to some of your analysis then. We look at the two majors, and on a two-party preferred basis, latest polls indicating that Labor is ahead. But does this still come down to perhaps some of those independents that may well determine the result of the election?
Yes, what I'm seeing in the data at this point in time, and we're still 10 days out from election day, is that people are still very undecided. And it's because they're not looking at the two major parties as much anymore. They're turning to independents because they're talking about the issues that really matter. And right now, and these issues move quite quickly, as you can imagine, as the campaign has moved. But the top two issues that are leading what we call the predictive rankings to influence voters are in relation to federal ICAP and politics and integrity. So there's another theme coming through as well, which is climate change. Now, both of these, these three issues are the ones that are capturing engagement of Australia. And that's where independents are actually getting a lot of ground.
Yeah, because we're seeing that essentially from the teal independents that are running, particularly in some of those high-profile Liberal-held seats. Is that perhaps to the detriment of the Green vote?
It's interesting. When I was looking at the Greens, and we were assessing all major and minor parties and independents side by side, the Greens have a very strong brand in relation to climate change. It's no surprise. And we see a lot of deep emotions around love, right? So there's very strong support for Greens. However, they're not cutting through. We're not seeing much engagement nationally. And so that's going to hurt their chances. So I would expect that with the Greens, they would retain their position, but not really swing voters to come across.
Elisa, what role is Clive Palmer's United Australia Party likely to play in the result, do you think?
The assessment on Clive Palmer's party is that they're actually creating deep engagement on the key issues that matter. So there's one theme that is really interesting, still resonates: vaccine mandate. And so Clive Palmer's message around freedom, anti-lockdown, anti-vaccines, they're actually resonating with the population. So what does that mean? To me, it says that Clive Palmer still has influence in this election.
All right, well, let's get back to the majors then. Labor versus the LNP. Now, criticism, I guess, of Labor that it doesn't really stand for anything. It learnt, I guess, its lesson from the past election where it had some really bold policies. It doesn't necessarily at this election. What's that doing then to voters' decision-making as far as whether they see enough there from Labor, or is it simply the fact that they're not Liberal?
This is always a very interesting election because there's no clear winner. So with Labor, they do have a strong brand because they are Labor. However, we're not seeing much cut through with Anthony Albanese. So compared to Scott Morrison, it's kind of like the way I see the emotions towards these two candidates and the parties. There's two elements. There's the person or the leader, and then there's the party. Now, on the person level, when you look at Scott Morrison, he has deep negative sentiment towards him. But when you look at Anthony Albanese, he has more passive emotional profile, which means that people are not deeply engaging emotionally with him, which is a risk to the Labor Party. Now, looking at the brand of Liberal and Labor, the Liberal brand is very strong. In fact, we're looking at it as the strongest brand still in this election.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's essentially become a presidential campaign in that sense, where you're looking at those competing personalities of Albanese versus Morrison. And as you say, perception there, particularly among some of those rusted-on Liberal voters, that Scott Morrison is on the nose.
Yes, unfortunately, I hear it also anecdotally, but in the data, it's very clear that the Scott Morrison factor is going to be an issue for the Liberal Party, because at the end of the day, you've got issues that have created such deep, intense emotion around, for example, women, around corruption, around integrity, a host of things that attract negative sentiment that are directed towards Mr. Morrison.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned women there. Seen obviously, perhaps they're the ones that are going to swing this election. As you say, a lot of negativity just as far as their perception is in regards to the Prime Minister at the moment.
Yeah, when we're specifically looking at emotions, we're also measuring intensity and the changes in intensity. So with the Morrison and women narrative, I've been monitoring this for over a year now. And early last year, we had a number of issues that flared the women of Australia. And those emotions were really deep, negative anger. And so we haven't seen that anger subside, interestingly. So I wouldn't be surprised that there's a large cohort of female Liberal voters that are really turning away from Morrison, but not necessarily going to Labor. And
All
hence
right.
the independent story.
Yep. No, that's fine. Elisa, okay, so with 10 days to go, can I put you on the spot? Are you going to stick your neck out? Can you give us a likely result?
Well, what I'm going to say is that if the election was called tomorrow and not 10 more days, then I would be saying that the data would be swinging towards a Labor minority government with the help of the Independents and the Greens.
All right, it's going to be fascinating, particularly as we ramp up towards the end of the campaign to see what particularly the majors are going to throw at us. Elisa, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.